This is Espire 2. Like its predecessor, Espire 1 VR Operative that came out in 2019, Espire 2 looks to once again be the Metal Gear Solid for VR that everyone hoped the first title would be. Spoiler alert, the first title fell quite short of those lofty goals, but I jumped into Espire 2 excited to see if lessons learned and a focus on releasing the title on only the Quest platform would make Espire 2 the game we all hoped the first would be. Stick around and let's find out if Espire 2 is Metal Gear Solid or just another Metal Gear Flaccid. Hey guys, it's Chris from the VR Grid. First things first, if you like this video, give it a little like button love. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing for continued VR goodness. Leave us a comment about what you think of the game, this review, and if you're thinking of grabbing it or holding out for a possible PSVR 2 port. We'd love to chat with you, so have at it in the comment section. And finally, if you love VR like we do, check out the Virtual Boys podcast live each and every Thursday, 6 p.m. Pacific here on YouTube, then posted that evening on all the major podcast providers. Okay, that's it for yabbering. Let's talk Espire 2. Picking up after the first game, the year is 2036, and once again you take on the role of Poe. You are essentially a pilot sitting in your comfy office navigating a droid, and after the events of the first game, Poe is thrust back into the world of dark espionage as the centerpiece of the Espire project. Now, with the help of two bleeding-edge droids called Frames and an all-new arsenal of weapons and tools, Poe must embark on a mission to eliminate the global threat imposed by the deadly terrorist organization, OFIS. Now, you might be asking if you need to go back and play the first game in order for the story to make sense. The answer is no. It's all very paint-by-numbers video gaming narrative stuff to get you into the game and sneaking by bad guys. So let's talk gameplay. So yeah, sneaking by bad guys. Espire 1 was very much a stealth game, and as I mentioned, and maybe if you remember, very much wanted to position itself as Metal Gear Solid in VR. Unfortunately, it fell flat on many fronts, most prominent of which was the enemy AI, or more specifically, the lack thereof. Similarly to its predecessor, Espire 2 also goes for stealth as a main gameplay mechanic and greatly encourages players to navigate missions without raising alarms, while also offering a run-and-gun approach as a perfectly acceptable means of completing mission objectives. And throughout its 6 to 8 hour campaign, Espire 2 offers players many sandbox moments where the way in which you get from one objective to the next is left very much up to your desired playstyle. And I'll be honest with you, as long as you play Espire 2 like a stealth game where being detected is not an option, it does a much better job than the first game in pretending to be a competent action stealth espionage type game. Unfortunately, the enemy AI, while slightly improved from the first title, is still half blind and almost completely deaf to their surroundings, making running around them, past them, and through them often easier than the stealth approach. Unfortunately, the same issue also hinders much of the game's fun factor in opting to go in loud, guns blazing, as the game gives players enough ammo to simply mow down enemies as they either stand around unaware or run around in a dumb enemy conga line. Combat again is hampered here in Espire 2 by gunplay that just isn't very fun or satisfying. Now, pistols, especially of the silence variety, I did find to play well in the game, as the gunplay lends itself to the more silent pop-pop of a silenced pistol. Unfortunately, every other weapon ranging from SMGs, rifles, and shotguns felt lifeless and very static, coming off more like shooting airsoft guns than high-powered weaponry, and just neutered the gunplay experience entirely, a point that is only doubled down on by the complete lack of blood, gore, or any real sense of realistic impact to enemies, with a ragdoll physics system that just feels off. Now, I must reiterate, when I played the game the way it was likely meant to be played, silently moving around in the rafters, hiding in closets, and tranquilizing or sniping enemies strategically, I could see the game that Digital Load was trying to make. And it's frustrating because outside of the game's AI and combat balancing, there's a lot to like here. Freedom of movement, like in the first game, is a high point here, as players are given so many movement options in their droid bodies, referred to here as frames. Running, crawling, and climbing all around the maps is encouraged and really reinforced the whole playground of combat mechanic the game is built around. Building on the movement mechanics of the first title, players are now given the option of two different frames in the form of Cinder and Sudi, the former of which is essentially your frame from the first title, with Sudi being a much smaller droid capable of fitting in tighter spaces and coming equipped with sound-distracting devices that, in a nicely unique VR twist, actually projects your own voice to unsuspecting enemies. And speaking of using your own voice in-game, Espire 2 now also allows players to sneak up on enemies and speak some pre-assigned phrases into the headset's microphone, like drop your weapon or lay down on the floor. Neat idea that I honestly rarely used, but it's a nice addition to be sure. Now, some frustrations around getting on top of surfaces aside, moving around the game world feels much more polished here than in the first title, due largely in part to a much more streamlined approach in the utilization of the hacking tool and tranquilizer gadgets, now both built into the suit, requiring much less playing around and switching of hands and weapons and holsters to accomplish these basic tasks. Accidentally grabbing and dropping a holstered gun is still an issue here though, when climbing and healing, especially when playing seated, but the in-game calibration tools which allow gamers to choose where exactly those chest and waist holsters are on their body mitigated most of these issues, which, to be fair, is often just some inherent issues of holstered objects in VR, and are handled here in Espire 2 about as well as can be expected. Now, before I move on from the game's movement mechanics, it needs to be said that Espire 2 greatly suffers from not having a jump mechanic, and anyone who has played Boneworks or Bone Lab will likely find this omission to be maddening, as instead players are required to either run around low-lying barriers or attempt some derpy lifting vault-like action with their hands to get over these low-lying objects. A sore spot to be sure for a game that has wonderfully embraced freedom of movement. Speaking of which, for those thinking all this movement is going to make you barf, Espire 2 once again brings the suite of comfort options from the first, going further than pretty much any VR game I've ever played to accommodate those in need. Now, getting away from the gameplay specifics, Espire 2 offers two ways to play. First and foremost is the single-player campaign, in which levels are unlocked as you progress through the storyline. Your performance in each mission is rated and scored based on a combination of star rating and money earned. Upon completion of these missions and various objectives, cheats can be unlocked and allow gamers to go back and replay previously unlocked levels with a collection of mods applied, really pushing the whole sandbox nature of Espire's level design. Further to this, new weapons are unlocked by either exiting a level with those new weapons on your person, or can be awarded by completion of certain levels. All unlocked weapons are available in your armory for a price and can be equipped in your loadout at the shooting range prior to each mission. A mechanic I absolutely loved, as I hate shooters that choose my loadout for a specific mission, making the whole level feel very scripted. Anyway, I appreciated this level of customization as it helped give the campaign a sense of progression and cohesiveness that the story didn't often provide. Now, the second way to play Espire 2 is with the addition of the new co-op campaign, a small campaign that takes place between the first and second titles story-wise, allowing you and a friend, or I guess a total stranger, to jump into one of 4 missions. Gameplay here is much the same as the main campaign, though with more of a focus on cooperative objectives like simultaneously activating 2 separate devices. I have to say though, I had a blast playing Espire 2 in co-op, making it easily my preferred way to play. Now, the AI isn't any better here, nor was the gunplay. It just mattered less, as the fun factor of goofing around with my friend was a key ingredient. Ammo and guns are shared here, so cooperation is key, though the lack of any in-game party chat could be a real deal breaker for many, so hopefully this is patched as soon as possible. And speaking of audio, Espire 1 was plagued with some very poor spatial audio, making it really hard to place where enemies were coming from, shooting from, and headed in general. Things here in Espire 2 are better than the first in that enemies are easier to locate as they talk, whistle, and walk around, but once alerted, I found it really hard to place enemies, going as far as to even what floor they were on, which is a real issue for a stealth game. Further to this, when in combat, enemy fire is so upfront in the audio mix, I found it next to impossible to place where any one shot was coming from, with little variation between shots coming across the room or right behind me, let alone left or right.
Mechanized hostile detected.
Another Mark 1. Get back! The is on its way. Just hold on a little longer.
Gun sounds wise, matters are made worse as, like gunplay itself, guns lack any real weight or volume in the audio mix, really killing the whole sense of firing a high-powered gun. And really, the long and the short of it, unfortunately, is that Espire 2 mix-wise is only slightly better than its predecessor, and it does really hurt the whole experience. Voice work here is serviceable, but nothing special. Though music-wise, I thought Espire 2 did a nice job of capturing the tone of a future-esque action thriller. Graphics-wise, Espire 2, like its audio, is serviceable. With only a Quest 2 version at launch, Espire 2 in this current iteration is plagued by muddy, blurry textures and has a real lack of any dynamic lighting, leaving the game world often feeling rather lifeless and generic. In fact, everything from the character animations and level design to the weapon effects all feel very basic and bland. Nothing here is particularly bad, it all just lacks much in the way of originality or personality. Now, to be sure, the limited power of the Quest 2 doesn't help things here, and I'd like to see Espire 2 on the PC and PSVR 2 in the future, but they can't really be blamed for everything, with games like the recently released Red Matter 2 being a perfect showcase of what can be pulled off on the Quest 2 hardware. And that brings me to my final thoughts and review score. Espire 2 is an okay title, pretty much across the board. Unfortunately for Digital Load, it is so obvious that they want this game, and more importantly this series, to be so much more than just okay. Now, like I said in my review of Espire 1, comparisons to Metal Gear Solid are so unfair, as many AAA studios have tried and failed to recreate what Hideo Kojima accomplished with that series. Espire 2 is certainly a step up from the first entry in the series, but unfortunately it still suffers from many of the same flaws, with the AI and audio design simply not holding up to scrutiny, and when pushed, often just falls apart. That being said, with your expectations in check, there's still some fun to be had here, playing around the sandbox-style levels and unlocking mods and weapons to experiment with. The VR Grid gives Espire 2 a 6.5 out of 10. Espire 2 is a very ambitious action stealth title that wants to play in the big leagues, but it isn't there yet. That doesn't mean it isn't fun though, and it's better with a friend. Those who like the first, this is an easy recommendation, but for those who felt the first was lacking, you might feel the same here. Anyways, guys, that's it for me. If you like this video, please hit that like button. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing. As always, I will catch you on the next video.